Hello and welcome to this podcast on the new European General Data Protection Regulations, the GDPR. My name's Steve Lofthouse, a GDPR specialist with the Proceed Group, and in this particular podcast we're going to be talking about the GDPR, how it affects business, and the kinds of things that you should be doing in order to become compliant. So I suppose the first question is, what is the GDPR and why has it been enacted? Well, in the 90s we had the Data Protection Act was brought about, and since then the way that companies collect data and utilise data has changed. Technology has improved, there is more options and more places where data and insight can be collected from. We have far more powerful computers and algorithms that can analyse that data and produce better insight. But that is at the expense, or the European Union felt that that was at the expense of the protections afforded to citizens. So they've drafted the GDPR with a view to harmonising regulations across Europe, so it's easier for companies to do business across Europe, but also with a view to strengthening the protections that apply to consumers. So who does it apply to? Well, it applies to any business doing business with citizens within the European Union. So if you're a citizen of the European Union, you are afforded these protections, and companies doing business with you, selling or trading or providing goods and services are required to comply with these regulations. Now, as a business, you may be thinking, well, I don't really need to comply with these regulations. Well, unfortunately, the European Union has built a very big stick into this legislation. They can level fines against companies for non-compliance, for breaches of these regulations. They can level fines of up to 4% of global revenue, or 20 million euros, whichever is the greater. So there really is a real need to comply with this legislation. But becoming compliant with this legislation, especially in a business which is SAP-centric, which uses SAP computer systems, is a vast undertaking. It requires collaboration from different teams, from within the boardroom, out into IT, into HR, and into the various lines of business within the organisation. If you have not started on a roadmap on the pathway to GDPR compliance, you're going to find it quite a uphill struggle. It's a vast undertaking, and you're going to find it quite difficult if you leave your preparations much longer. Now, the GDPR is not a piece of legislation that you can just comply with and forget. The legislation has been drafted such that roughly 50% of the text within the legislation relates to your ability to prove your ongoing compliance with the legislation. So this isn't something that you can just meet and forget. This is something which is going to require that you re-engineer your business processes, that you are continually vigilant, and that you audit on an ongoing basis the processes within your company to ensure that you continue to meet compliance. So, what are the things that you need to be doing in order to reach compliant, in order to become compliant? Well, the first step is around awareness. You need to make sure that the people within your company, starting at board level, are aware of the GDPR, that they understand the impacts of the GDPR upon the company, because it's going to require significant resources, especially if you're a large organisation. It's going to require significant resources in order to become SAP compliant. And then on an ongoing basis, you need to ensure that the staff within the company are aware of the GDPR and are aware of how that impacts on their day-to-day working, on their need to keep client data confidential, so that they don't go digging away within databases to try and access customer data. So the process of awareness is one that's going to continue all the way through your compliance activities and out the other end. starting with making the board aware so that we can get kind of buy-in from the board and funding and help and support, but also then moving forwards into the staff training and staff awareness. So having made people aware, having got buy-in, we can move on to step 2, which is essentially what data do we hold? What do we hold and where do we hold it? So we need to go through a process of discovery, a process of data discovery, to find out what data we hold, why we hold it, where it came from, and which particular computer system it resides in. Because we're all aware that there are various information silos within an organisation, and information and data can hide within various departments, and that's not acceptable under any circumstances, let alone the GDPR, but that's not an acceptable situation. So we need to go through a process of data discovery in order to answer these questions. Now, if you're using SAP, brilliant. You can use SAP Information Steward, and that has capabilities within it that will allow you to document personal data that you hold, where it came from, who has access to it, and Information Steward is quite capable of scanning SAP systems and non-SAP systems. Now this audit, this data discovery audit, is actually quite a key step. It's one of the foundation steps in the whole compliance process, because this data discovery audit that we're going to do, the output of that, the documented output of that, is going to form the foundation for a lot of the steps which come after it, but it's also going to form part of our documentation that we could supply if the Information Commissioner so asked, to prove that we've been through this process of discovery, to prove that we are compliant with the GDPR. Now, when we're doing this process of discovery, you need to remember that you also need to check things like your SAP log files, your backup files, the systems that you currently have in development, as well as the systems that you're actually using at the minute. Data will reside in many, many places, and you need to be aware of all of them. Now, having done your data discovery, your data audit, we can move on to step 3. And in step 3, I want to know what I do with that data. How do I process that data? So in the past, we lived in a world of big data where data was just collected, and we came up with the term, everybody's heard the term banded around, that data was the new oil. And we were running sophisticated algorithms across our business warehouses and across these data lakes in order to produce business insight which drove business forwards and gave us new opportunities. But that was done in perhaps an obscure way or a way that, in a manner that wasn't necessarily transparent to the people whose data we were analysing. So now we need to understand how we're using the data that we've discovered. Where does that data flow? Into what processes does that data flow? Into which systems does that data flow? Now again, if we've got an SAP system in there, brilliant. We can use SAP Information Steward and we can get the insight and understand where this personal data is being used, and then we can use SAP Process Control, and that's going to help us undertake policy surveys and data usage reports. Both of those are kind of key tasks in this GDPR roadmap. Transparency and accountability are key under the GDPR. Individuals whose data you hold, those individuals are going to have their rights modified and strengthened. So you need to understand which data you hold, where you hold that data, what processes you use that data for, where that data flows within your organisation. And that knowledge will give you an understanding of your lawful basis for processing data. And you need to have a lawful basis for processing data, and you need to ensure that the people whose data you hold, the clients, your customers, your business partners, understand your lawful basis. But we'll touch on that in a moment. So, having understood, I'm now aware of what data I hold as a company. I understand where that data resides within my company, which systems it resides within, how it flows through my company, what processes I use that data for. I'm now in a position to judge some risks. So, what would be the risk if that data escaped from my system? And when I say escaped, it could be that the data is released by accident. Maybe it's copied onto a USB stick, as happens, and is left in a car park. Or maybe we have a breach of security and data is stolen. So actually, what would be the impact of that? What would be the impact of theft of that data? What would be the impact of the process we are running on that data? So if we're just running a process across data which decides whether to send you a newsletter, well, okay, that's quite a low impactful process. But if I have a process which is running across a large pool of data and making some decision based on a statistical model, so maybe it's a decision as to whether I'm going to offer a line of credit to a company or a line of credit to an individual, well, actually, that has a much bigger impact on that individual. The processing has a much bigger impact on that individual, and the data used in order to come up with that decision has a much bigger impact on the individual if that data was stolen or lost or released. So I'm going to do a data privacy impact assessment, a DPIA, on the data that I hold and on the processes, targeted towards the processes that I'm undertaking with that data. And if, as a result of doing a data protection impact assessment, I have a process, a data pool that comes out as quite high risk, then that's telling me that I need to do something about that. I need to put in place measures to reduce that risk, be it extra security measures, or maybe I use different data sets or anonymized data and things like that. Now, again, if you're an SAP house, this is fairly straightforward. SAP Process Control, it can streamline the process of creating and distributing these data protection impact assessments. And if the impact assessment indicates that the data processing is high risk, then process control includes functionality to raise those issues and allow you to put in place measures that are going to mitigate that risk. Okay, so we have to be much more risk aware. Now, having done a data protection impact assessment, and initially companies will probably have to do them on all of the processes that they have, because one of the requirements is that a DPIA must be done if it's never been done before, regardless of whether the process is whether you consider the process to be high risk or not. If you haven't done a DPIA before, then you need to do one. So, having done our impact assessments, then we can move on and we can review consent. Now, earlier I said that you need, as a business, a legitimate reason to process data. Now, that legitimate reason could be the basis of a contract. You're purchasing a product from me. Fine, there is a contract between us and I'm processing your data on the basis that I am selling you a particular product. But there is always an element of consent within data processing. You consented to me sending you a regular marketing brochure because I asked you, can I send you a newsletter? Yes, you can. Fine. So there's always an element of consent. Now, companies need to go and review the consents that they have been given, because under the new Data Protection Act and the GDPR, where an individual has given consent to processing, their rights are far, far stronger. So as a company, as a business, you should always find a legitimate reason for processing somebody's data. If you can avoid relying on consent, you should do. But where you have obtained consent, you need to review the mechanism by which you obtained consent and what that consent was obtained for. So under the GDPR, consent has to be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. You can only process data for what you have been given consent to process data. So if I said to you, can I please send you a marketing brochure, and you consented to that, yes, you can. But then I use your data as well as sending you a marketing brochure. I also use your data to do some basic household analysis. Under the GDPR, me doing the basic household analysis is a breach of the Data Protection Act, no, breach of the General Data Protection Act. That's illegal processing because I have not got your consent to do that, and I do not have a legitimate business reason for doing it. Now, again, within an SAP system, brilliant. We've got functionality that sits against the master data, and we can configure that functionality so that as part of the process for creating kind of customer or vendor or employee master data, we can record consent against the master data entry, which is fantastic. But going forwards, you need to review the consent that you've already obtained and understand how that consent was obtained and whether that consent covers the use that you put the data to. Now, as well as obtaining consent, individuals can also withdraw their consent. And the mechanism for withdrawing consent must be as simple and straightforward as it was to gain that consent. So if you have a website with a tick box that says, yes, I agree to you sending me marketing information, you must also have a website with a tick box that says, I want you to stop sending me marketing information. It has to be that easy and that straightforward. So we understand what data we have, we understand the process that we go through with that data, where that data flows within our organisation, what processing is done upon that data. We've reviewed our consent, so we're happy that the data we hold, that we have consent for it, and we have a legitimate business reason for holding it. So now we need to start and communicate. We need to talk to our clients, our customers, our business partners, and we need to tell them, do you know what? This is the data that we collect. This is the data that we hold, and this is what we do with it. These are the kind of processes that we run across it. This is the processing that we do with it, and this is how long we're going to retain your data, and this is after how long we're going to delete your data. And we need to put that in our information privacy notice, and we need to make that available to clients, customers, the general public. So far more transparency in what data we hold, what we do with that data, how long we intend to keep that data. Now, if you're an SAP partner, if you're an SAP customer, brilliant, fine. Information lifecycle management, that is your system of choice. If you've got HCM in place already and you've got a license for HCM, SAP are giving you a license for information lifecycle purely for use with HR data. But information lifecycle management system, that's going to manage the data retention periods and ensure that the data is deleted in a timely, compliant, safe and secure manner. So now we've communicated this information to our customers, clients, business partners. We've updated our privacy policy. Now we need to start and think about some of the internal policies. So under the Data Protection Act, a data individual has a right to request a copy of the data that you hold on them. And that right is far, far stronger under the General Data Protection Act. So in the past, an organisation could charge for one of these subject access requests, as they're called, and in the UK it was up to £10, £15, something like that. Under the GDPR, you are not able to charge for a subject access request. So that service now becomes free. So you could possibly predict that, given that it's free, the number of requests that companies are going to get is going to be far greater. And individuals have the right to know all the data that you hold of them. Now you might say that's fine, okay, I'm just going to jump into the core computer system and I'm going to pull out all of the data on that customer. That's fine. Okay. But what about if you've also plugged into that client's social media? You can connect on social media, and we know that a lot of companies do. Well, if you're holding social media posts about that customer, then you need to delete them. You need to reach out and delete the tweets. You need to reach into your other systems and delete any paper-based records. So this idea of deleting records does not just simply sit within one computer system. You need to reach out across all of your systems, be that paper-based or IT, because the GDPR applies equally to paper-based records as it does to computerized records, and you need to discover those and delete them. And you need to do that in a manner which is safe and auditable. So, as well as requesting the information that you hold on an individual, individuals also have the right to request that information is accurate and up to date. So if you hold, for example, the wrong address for somebody, well, that individual has the right to ensure that that address is corrected. Okay, you think that's quite straightforward. Brilliant. Okay. Well, what happens if you use a data processing company? It's your responsibility as the data controller, as the person who gathered that data in the first place, who dictates what happens with that data. It's your responsibility to ensure that the data is accurate across all of the systems and all of the processor as well. So if an individual comes to you and says, you've got inaccurate data on me, I want that data correcting, here is the correct data, you need to push those corrections into your own system, and you need to ensure that your processor, your data processor, corrects their data as well. So individuals can request a copy of the data, they can request corrections to data, they can request that data is deleted, they have the right to request that data is deleted. So you may get requests from individuals asking that all the information that you hold on them is deleted, and as long as there are no kind of legal precedents, for example tax records or things like this, you need to delete data in all of your systems. Individuals can also request that data is blocked, that data is not used for a certain process. So I could provide my data to a company through the course of making an order and purchasing a product, and I could state that actually I do not want my data to be processed to provide me with recommended products. Are your systems capable of tagging data in that way, in a manner that which shows easily what data can be used for and what it can't? Now, if you're an SAP house, brilliant. Information Lifecycle Manager, that's your go-to software. That's going to ensure that the data that you hold is retained only for as long as it's required, because we can set deletion dates on there, we can set legal holds on data, we can restrict the usage of data, and ILM ensures that when we do delete data, it's removed from all the SAP systems, and it's done so in a manner which is auditable and provable. Okay, so the final thing that we need to think about from a practical point of view is what are we going to do in the event of a data breach? So there is a requirement within the GDPR that you strengthen your IT systems, that data is held in a secure manner, be that secure systems or be that encryption, but you need to have systems in place that can detect data breaches. Now, one of the points to note here is that if you have some client data and one of your customer service reps views that client data and that customer service rep is not authorized to view that client data, that is considered a data breach under the terms of the GDPR. So if we just give you a daft example, if somebody from the marketing department wandered into the sales department and opened up the filing cabinet with all the customer records in it and pulled out a customer's record, had a quick look at it, put it back in the filing cabinet and then left, that is a data breach under the terms of the GDPR because the marketing executive was not authorized to view that data. So you need to put in place mechanisms which are going to protect the data, and maybe that's SAP Access Control, which is going to give you the auditable enforcement of access restrictions and policy restrictions. But you also need to put in place procedures and other pieces of software to protect your network, protect your systems, and educate your staff on what is acceptable. When it comes to a data breach, you need to be able to detect that data breach quickly, and having become aware of it, as an organisation, having become aware of it, you must report that data breach to the Information Commissioner within 72 hours. Now, there are certain caveats around that. If the data is encrypted in a format which is not readable, then there are time extensions. However, 72 hours is the window, and if you miss that window, then you need to start explaining to the Information Commissioner why you've missed that window, and you could be fined not only for the breach, but also for not reporting it within 72 hours. So you need to ensure that your corporate systems, your networks, your intrusion detection systems, they are robust and capable of detecting breaches quickly. And you need to have policy and procedure in place to enable you to act having discovered one. Now, all the way through this, I've continued to repeat this idea that things need to be auditable, things need to be provable. And as I said at the start, the majority, a good 50-60% of the text within the GDPR relates to this idea that you have to be able to prove compliance. And things like audits, things like policies and procedures, which are cascaded down from the boardroom, staff training, these kind of things. These are going to be the mechanisms by which you would prove compliance, or the items which would form your compliance if and when you received an audit from the Information Commissioner's office. The Information Commissioners, they're getting strengthened powers. They're going to be able to audit companies for GDPR compliance without notice, so they can walk into your business at any point in time and begin an audit to understand your GDPR compliance. So compliance is both mandatory and demonstrable. You are required to comply, and you have to demonstrate that you are compliant. Now, there are a few SAP tools that can help you do that. The continuous controls and compliance monitoring capabilities within SAP Process Control. And then if you couple that with the audit functionality that's in SAP Lifecycle Management, that's going to allow you to demonstrate a very high level of audit and accountability to those regulators, which is something that you're going to have to do on a continued basis moving forwards. Some organisations are going to have to bring in a data protection officer. The need for a data protection officer has been strengthened within the GDPR, and their data protection officer is going to be responsible for ensuring that companies are compliant with the GDPR. So all of these audits and these policies and rolling compliance will be owned within the company by the data protection officer, and it will be the data protection officer that is the contact, the point of contact for the information commissioner. So the GDPR is quite an all-encompassing, quite a wide-ranging piece of legislation, and it does require that companies change the way they operate. If you're an SAP-centric company, brilliant. SAP have produced a number of software tools that are going to help you become compliant, and that's fantastic. You just need to follow the process, but also be aware you will have systems which are external to your SAP systems, provided by other vendors, and you need to be aware of the data which is within those systems, because GDPR applies to both kind of IT systems and to paper-based systems in equal measure. So that was a brief overview of the GDPR. And I hope you found that useful. My name's Steve Lofthouse for the Proceed Group. Cheerio.
If you would like to read more about the steps you should be taking to become GDPR compliant, we have a series of blog posts designed to help you do just that. The easiest way to find them is to use your favourite search engine and search for proceedgroup.com GDPR.